Hello everybody, welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. We have a whole bunch of reviews to get to, so we're going to jump right in. These first three are all from the P65 line. First one is a Dire Crocodile. It's a single piece miniature. It does look quite similar to the other Dire Crocodile that came out recently, except this new one is a little bit cheaper and it has its mouth closed. I think if you were doing a water encounter, like going down a swamp or something like that, whether it's in a fantasy or modern game, you could use both of these just to have a little variety if you wanted to, be a neat encounter, or you could just go with the cheaper, newer version of it, but either way is fine. The new one, like I said, is a single piece model, has a visible mold line around the bottom half of the model, but it really wasn't too much of a problem to clean up. It looks like it should paint up pretty quickly and easily, and then maybe if you even wanted to drop some of these in as a variant unit or counts as unit of salamanders or maybe even razordons for a lizardman army in Warhammer Fantasy, you might be able to get away with that if your opponent's willing. Next we have two pillars, a pillar of good and pillar of evil. These were previously released in the Dark Heaven Legends line, but you can get them for a couple of dollars cheaper now as part of the P65 line of figures. Each one is a single piece miniature, and they are sold separately, but each one is about 2 3/4 inches tall, so they would be very nicely sized for pillars in a dungeon or some other diorama or something like that. I think you could also use, especially the Pillar of Evil, as part of a Chaos War Shrine for Warhammer Fantasy. I think that'd be a very good application for it. Or I could maybe see using it as some extra adornment for a Cauldron of Blood for my Dark Elf army in Warhammer Fantasy. But however you use it, they need very little cleaning and probably very little in the way of painting. You could just prime them, a dark color, dry brush, done. Okay, on to some Pathfinder figures now, and first off we have the second version of Valeros, the male iconic fighter for Pathfinder. And here you can take a look at both of them, the original version and the new version side by side, maybe make a determination of which one you like better. The first one is in a very dynamic fighting pose. The second is almost in a pose where he's getting ready to do what he's doing in the first pose. The first one is very dynamic. The second one is a little more static, but still in a ready position to get to work in the fighting that he's got to do. He's wearing plate and chain armor. He's got a ton of gear, a longsword and a dagger that he's carrying as his weapons, but you can see on his belt he's got a tankard, there's pouches, there's a bedroll, and also as a separate piece there's a bow and a quiver that's filled with arrows that fits right into 2 notches on his back. Personally, I'm more of a fan of the first version of Valeros. Now, there's nothing wrong with the second one. The sculpt is clean, it's crisp, all the detail is great, the face looks very good. Everything is fine about the miniature. I just prefer the pose of the original one, but I do very much like Reaper releasing separate or alternate versions of previously released character models just to give the player or the purchaser a little bit of variety in what they might want to buy. And you could even have the 2 different versions as champions or leader models for 2 different units in a mass combat game. I think they could work like that if you wanted to pick up both of them. Next up we have Chammandy Drovenge. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I don't know really anything about the Pathfinder background, so I'm assuming she's some kind of named character, and there's really a lot going on with this miniature. It's a single piece figure, didn't need a whole lot of cleaning, and you can see she's carrying something in each hand. In her left hand it looks like she's carrying a very pointed ceremonial dagger. In her right hand, it also looks like she's carrying a dagger or some other kind of bladed implement, but it has all sorts of extra detailing on it that, in my mind right now, are probably more like some kind of spell effect or manifestation of a spell that's encircling the dagger itself. Her robes are very sharply cut to where they're going to show off a lot of leg and a lot of cleavage, and around her neck there appears to be some kind of winged cat kind of beast that's draped itself over her shoulders and kind of resting on her shoulders and neck area. So looks to me to be some kind of familiar for her, and she very much looks like a spellcaster. So if you were going to use her as a player character, I think she'd fit that role just fine. Or I think you might be able to drop her into an Empire or Bretonnian army for Warhammer Fantasy Battle as an Empire spellcaster or a Bretonnian Damsel of the Lady. So I think either of those applications would be good along with regular player character use. This next pack contains 4 little miniatures, and they're called Pugwampis. and they're from the Pathfinder line. They're a monster from Pathfinder that are fey creatures that are bad luck creatures, and they're pretty universally hated by everything in the world, even other fey. And the only reason I know that is because I took a quick Google search and found them on a Pathfinder wiki. Now for me, my immediate thought for these guys were either to use them as kobolds or snotlings. Now for kobolds, I think they'd mix in okay with the other Reaper kobolds if they're all painted the same kind of skin color and they have the same color armor, just a dirty brown armor and rusted weapons and things like that. I think they'd work fine with the rest of the Reaper kobolds. Now for snotlings, you might be thinking it's a real stretch to use them as snotlings, but I think if you painted them green and you had a whole bunch of these guys on a 40mm square base, you could use them as snotlings, or even if you just use them as maybe to have a snotling standing on the base of your orc warlord next to him, or almost like in a Noblar role, but they're smaller than Noblars from the Ogre Kingdom's army. So I think they're cool for that. Each one of the 4 needed some cleaning, but none of them took too long to clean off the extra metal from the casting process, and I think for whatever fantasy game you're playing, if it's an RPG or in a tabletop game, you can probably find a use for these. Okay, on to some figures from the Dark Heaven Legends line, and this first guy is Ardellen. He's a ranger. It's pretty obviously a human figure, and he's a very stocky, well-built, single-piece miniature. Doesn't look like he's missed any meals or anything, but he just looks more thick and maybe stocky, not big, fat, and pudgy or anything like that. The face is very well done. He looks square-jawed and stern and very much in the heat of battle, and I think that's what I like the most about the model. The face just really draws you in. It's an outstanding face sculpt on this figure, and it really goes with the sense of movement and action of the rest of the figure, where he's holding his sword up in his right hand about to swing down and had just come across, opened up with his shield. Just awesome miniature. Sense of motion and animation is wonderful. This is probably my favorite figure of this entire batch for this episode. He's wearing leather armor with some chain, and also, as you can see, has a long flowing cloak. On the front side of the shield, it's already been sculpted in with a dragon on there, so if you didn't want that, I suppose you could shave it down and get it back to flat again, but it's really an awesome extra bit of detail that has already gone into the miniature itself and save you the time of having to either putty something on there or try to draw it or paint it freehand, which I couldn't do, so I really like that extra detail on there. There's a pouch that he's carrying along with a horn that's on his belt, and like I said, just outstanding miniature here, and I really like it. Next we have another ranger, and this is a dwarven ranger. His name is Bregol Jagstone. Another single piece figure. In his right hand he carries a pretty heavy axe. It's got 2 blades or 2 pointed ends on the bottom side and 1 on the top, so you could use it as a pickaxe or just as a regular axe type of weapon. Nothing in his left hand except you can see it's resting on the pommel of a sword. The rest of the sword can't be seen. It would go between his cloak and the back side of the miniature. He is wearing a bit more armor than Ardellen, the previous ranger we looked at, and also in a little bit less of an action pose. He's in a more of a stoic pose, but he's got plate leggings and boots on. You can see some metal plates up on his right shoulder. Looks like he's wearing some kind of studded leather on his midsection, so a bit more heavier in the armor area there. A full beard and mustache, pretty stereotypical for a dwarf that you can see under his hood. And if you wanted to work him into a Warhammer Fantasy dwarf army, you could clip off part of the integrated base and get him to fit on a 20mm square base. The previous ranger, on the other hand, won't fit on a 20mm base unless you are okay with a lot of overhang, but you could get it on a 1-inch base. Alright everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Reaper Minis TV. We're going to start off next episode looking at another Dark Heaven Legends figure that is going to be part of a Razig army that I'm creating for Warlord, and we'll talk about that army when we get into next episode. Thanks for watching.